Welcome to our webinar, Brightbox Consulting's webinar on design maturity. A very relevant topic by the number of RSVPs that we received in such a short space of time, or well over 300, which I think is fantastic. It also shows that it's a topic that's on everybody's minds. So, and I'm really pleased to have our panelists join today, and I'll introduce them in a second. But just before I do so, I just want to very quickly introduce Brightbox Consulting. So we're a recruitment company that specializes in human-centered design, in digital technology and products, and in digital marketing. Although design is probably about 50% of what we do. We've been recruiting in the design space for 8 years, and we place a lot of value on the networks we build in the niche areas we work in. 90% of our business is referral-based, which means that we don't even need to advertise job roles. Candidates come directly to us. I know it's a challenging market, and I think COVID, excuse me, and the current lockdown have a lot to say about that. But if you are a client looking for great designers or a designer looking to do great work, please connect with me or Nicole Howe. She's listening in today. She's our human-centered design talent specialist. Connect with us on LinkedIn or send us an email. Okay, that's introduction over. And now on to our conversation on design maturity. For anyone listening in, please type any questions that you have for the panelists during the talk, as towards the end, I'm going to do my best to field as many questions as I can, time permitting. So, courtesy of Katja Forbes, she told me a little bit about Leah Bewley, who is a researcher, designer, and author based in California. She spoke in 2015 about organizational experience design maturity, and that it had 3 stages: the outdated, the modern, and the progressive. Although Marla Mitelman shared an article with me a couple of weeks ago from Envision titled The New Design Frontier, which spoke about the design maturity solar system and why it is that some companies' efforts are more influential than others. The 3 levels of design maturity changed to 5 levels of design maturity. They discuss the phases of change needed to deliver the highest results. So from the producers, where design is what happens on a screen, to the connectors, where design is what happens in a workshop, the architects, where design is a standardized, scalable process, the scientists, where design is a hypothesis and an experiment, and then the visionaries, where design is a business strategy. So how do you determine where a business sits? How do you as designers influence change to allow an organization to become more mature? And then how can designers really work with the business and internal stakeholders to take them along the journey to maturity? So I'm really pleased to have 5 design professionals, design leaders join in this very conversation today. And I'm going to quickly introduce you all. So if you want to wave as I call out your name. First of all, we have Katja Forbes, who is the Managing Director of Designit. We have Marla Mitelman, who is the Director of Mitelman Webb and currently an Antler advisor. Shane Burford, the Head of Design Research for carsales.com.au. Lee Tucknott, the Head of Product Design for Whispr. And the lovely Erietta Sapounakis, who is the Head of UX for The Iconic. Guys, welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Thank you.
Excited to have you. Excited to have you.
Yeah.
I'm going to launch into the first question. And so interpretation of what design maturity looks like can vary from business to business. I think we've all kind of spoken about this. Businesses say that they are design mature, but it's actually when you start working with them and you get your head under the bonnet that you actually realize that there's varying levels of maturity. And so I'm going to kind of lead with a question just on that. So as a designer, what questions should you be asking during an interview process that will help you to determine where they might sit or a business might sit in the maturity ladder? I'm going to open up with Marla.
Thanks, Liam. I knew you were going to do that. I think that's a really good question. And I was thinking about this a little bit over the last few days. And I think there's like quite a few questions you can ask to sort of gauge, and whether it's the interview process or whether you've sort of accepted a job and you haven't done it at that point either. And I think like there's 3 things that sort of spring to mind for me, and I'd love to sort of hear what the panelists think about this as well. And the first one is sort of, who's the most senior design representation in your organization? I think that's a really good question to ask, because it sort of gets a picture of, you know, how well is design leadership represented at the C-suite or even C-1. The other question I'd ask is, where does design report into? Does it have have its own seat at the table, or does it report into product or technology or marketing? I think that's a really good indicator of how design is perceived and where it sits, I suppose, in the buckets of an organization. And then I think the third one, which I think is a bit of a perler, is tell me about the kind of user research you do. Because even though you might not be specifically asking about what roles people play in that organization, I think it will give you a bit of a good indicator as to how they see human-centered design and how they evolve that in their practices at work.
Fantastic. Does anyone want to kind of add to that? Erietta, is there any kind of comments that you would want to make? So who's the most senior? Where does design report into? And what type of research do you do, being the three kind of main ones there from Marla?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think you've got to be really clear about what you're looking for in the answers to those questions. Like, where does design report into? Very few organisations in Australia would have design as its standalone department, not reporting into something. And I've definitely worked in organisations where the design, it was a very mature design function. And with every restructure, it was moved. And I would say at that point in time, it was one of the most mature design functions. So if you answered, if you heard the answers to the other questions, you'd be really satisfied. And then where it was positioned, day 1 to month 6 was different. So, you know, those things change, businesses change all the time. But look, I agree, and definitely the question about customer research is really key, like where in the product development cycle or service design cycle or whatever the business does, what are they doing? What are they doing when is really important. And I'd encourage everyone to look up the track record of the hiring manager for sure.
Yeah. Lee, I'm going to open the question to you because we spoke earlier and I think you mentioned it was a good point that you can ask questions, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the answers are going to be the true reflection of what you're going to find when you actually join. So is there anything that you'd kind of add to that?
Look, there's a few things that you can, I guess you can do once you actually kind of get into an organization, but in terms of, you know, the point around the questions that you can ask, I think I agree with, you know, Marla and Erietta in terms of exactly, they're the questions that I would absolutely want to know the answers to. But I think it is a challenge to, you know, often you're in a situation, you know, potentially an interview situation, you might want the role, they might want you to take it. They're obviously going to be, you know, instilling the values of the organization and saying, yeah, we love design, it's totally embedded, everyone's bought into it. But it's, you know, often when the rubber hits the road and you get there and you kind of start to unpick and unpack some of these things that you go, actually, maybe they weren't quite as upfront as they first thought. But like, I totally agree with everything I think that's been said. One of the additional things that I really like, and I think it was Erica Hall that was talking about, like, this question about to what extent is it safe for your organization to admit they don't know something. Like, for me, that's a really good question to ask in that kind of situation, because that really kind of starts to get to the, you know, how the nub of it, how, you know, how confident are we that it's fine to kind of make mistakes and, you know, and figure this stuff out a little bit. So yeah, so it's a really interesting challenge for sure.
It's a really good point. Katja, I'm going to kind of throw that over to you and maybe just add a little bit of an extension of that question, because, you know, let's say you start working for the organization and you're kind of looking for evidence of what exists that can help you determine what, you know, whether research is being done, what kind of level of maturity the organization's at once you started working there. What do you need to look for? What do you need to see evidence of?
I think you need to see evidence of ceremonies being in place where design is actually talked about, is discussed, is given airtime, I suppose, in the organization. During the interview process, I would suggest that you flip it a little bit on its head and ask whoever is interviewing you, can you tell me about a project or something that you've launched where you feel like design was really critical and impactful? Like, ask them the things that they would ask you, because what you want to hear is their organization their portfolio is as good as your portfolio is going to be. So when you get in there, you know, provided you're satisfied with the answers, you're going to be looking for evidence about what's the scope of design in the organization, what's the breadth of influence that they seem to have or don't seem to have, what conversations at what sort of level, I guess, of discussing design is actually happening in the organization with a regular cadence. Like, are there guilds? Are there regular, you know, design critiques? Are there those kinds of practices in place as part of the way of working? And is space made for that? So I think those are the types of things you'd be looking for straight away. And also, you know, to Marla's point, can you please give me every single piece of user research that you have ever done so that I can just evaluate that it actually A, exists, B, is, you know, of a quality that we can make decisions based on it, and you know, and see that it gives me an idea of what's gone before, so I know what not to redo and what to take as my objectives into the future.
I've had lots of conversations with people where clients say, yes, we do research, but when you actually get your head under the bonnet, you can't see any example of hypothesis. There's nothing there that kind of gives you that indication.
We did a survey.
We've launched into wireframe. Okay, Shane, I'm going to throw that over to you. Is there anything that you kind of would add, i.e. kind of interview, or when you actually have already started working, what you kind of would look for, what questions you should be asking?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I totally agree with the questions that everyone's already asked. I guess the one other thing that I would add is, you know, working in a lower maturity organization isn't necessarily the worst thing. So, you know, sometimes you want to work in a really high maturity organization if you're wanting to be around, you know, other experts and be inspired by them. But if you're working in a really low maturity organization, there's often a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurialism. There's a lot of opportunity for you to make, you know, a big impact on the organization. And often design becomes a little bit more like design and coach. So I guess the only thing I would add is, you know, if you know, in this question, we're talking about going into the interview process. If you're going into the interview process and thinking about, you know, a new role, just to be really intentional about what kind of role suits you in your career at the moment. You might want to, you know, be in a lower maturity organization to have more of an impact, maybe. Yeah, and if, of course, you do want to work in a higher maturity organization, then the questions here will help you to understand that.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's a good point. You know, low maturity might create opportunity, providing the openness is there to still be able to kind of do good work and be, you know, and we'll kind of go into there being kind of that top-down focus as well, from an organizational perspective in a second. But anything else that anyone wants to add, just kind of on that point before I go into the next question? Cool. Okay, let's move on. So some organizations can have very large design teams and multiple leaders. Some might only have a couple of designers working within the organization. What type of structure should an organization have that can allow design to have a focal place? Does anyone want to kind of jump into that? Katja, shall I kick that off with you?
Yeah, I think you're definitely describing organizations that I have worked in at both sizes. With the very large size sort of design team, they're generally spread across squads or teams or things like that. And the concept of creating that sort of guild space for them, so that there is a conversation that happens that is a design-based conversation with a regular cadence, is one organizational structure that can help bring people who have been spread all over an organization into different squads and different teams together to lend their expertise to each other's work, which is why I think design critique is, again, another really important aspect of the organization and behaviors that you really want to see. In smaller organizations, the tendency, I think, is for designers to kind of bunker down together and, like, you know, and put the little tortoise shells over them, because no other discipline, I think, other than perhaps sales, gets as much criticism from people outside the discipline with confidence that is unjustified as design does, because everybody's got an opinion. I recall sitting in working for a large bank quite a while ago. Marla has also worked for this large bank, and sat with my wireframes in front of me in a committee of 20 people telling me where I should put the freaking buttons, like, and nobody there was more qualified than me to decide where things went in the interaction design. So I think that there is this, and we're moving towards a different construct in a lot of companies. So if you look at SaaS companies and things like that, we now don't function properly unless we have a equal three-legged chair, with one being that sort of commercial product outcome, product management, if you want, type leg of the chair. There's the design leg of the chair, which is like, how do we actually get to the outcome and get those commercial things that we want to happen and have this product successful? And then there's the engineering leg of the chair that has to enable the how and get us to the outcome as well. And I think that there's less, there's more need for those three legs of the chair to be really equal, and those conversations to be happening in organizations, but still reflecting on the fact that they're different disciplines, and that they need their own space. And I'm seeing a lot of design can't sort of sit in an ivory tower in any way, shape or form. It has to be a something that permeates through the whole organization. So I'll throw over to maybe to Marla to reflect on that, because she's been in the same spaces and seen the same things.
Marla,
I was just going to, thanks. I was just going to say, I agree with what you've said, Katja, and it's like you need to have, I think Atlassian call it the triad, which is those three have equal weight. But what I was going to sort of say with regards to the original question is, with regards to structure, it really depends. Like, I don't think there's the right model for any one organization. I think that they need to bend and flex depending on the needs of the business and what they're trying to achieve and the scale that they've managed to reach. But I want to sort of double down on Katja's point, which is the community is the most important part of that, creating that linkage between designers and giving them a space to collaborate, giving them a space to be critiqued in a safe, psychologically safe way, and in a way driving that from within design. So it's not coming from another part of the business that doesn't necessarily have that expertise. I literally, Katja, was in a meeting last week where there was a committee of design, which was at MD level beneath, sort of trying to change things on a screen. And what I love about that though, I wanted to shoot myself, but what I love about that though is they care about it. And to me, that's the first step, is that if they want to influence change, then at least they understand enough to want to sort of try and move the dial in the right direction. And so I think that, yes, it's frustrating. Yes, it's a pain in the ass. We all want to go home and have like a shot of tequila to just, numb the pain of that experience. But I would rather be in an environment where people give a shit than people who don't. And then it's our job to sort of bring them on that journey and to sort of, take off the what did you say, tortoiseshell hats, and draw back the veil and really articulate what it is we do and how we can bring value, but also, deliver impact. And I think that's.
Yeah.
Hey, can I just
absolutely
on something? So I absolutely agree. I just wanted to pick up on something that Katja said, which I really agree with, is this notion that design becomes very navel-gazy and like internally kind of self-congratulatory. It's like, we're doing such an awesome job, guys. And it's like, we have to like, we can't go, that can't be how we operate. Like, we have to have those communities. We have to be, externally focused, both in terms of the stakeholders and the business we're working with, and equally or more importantly with our customers who we're delivering value to. So yeah, I have a bit of a bugbear about like where design teams become this sort of little, thing, ivory tower. Yeah.
I think Shane hit on it before, where he was talking about coaching, taking that coaching mindset.
Yeah, definitely. Erietta or Shane, is there anything that you would kind of add to that point? By the way, a couple of comments here as well. Joyce says collaboration and trust are key. Very, very true. Anything that you guys would add before I kind of move on to the next question?
Look, just really what that last point from Joyce about collaboration. Like, we can't, regardless of how senior you are, unless you're the CEO, you can, or maybe on the C-suite. So there could be someone here who can, but you can rarely influence the structure of an organization. So think about what you can control, and what you can control is collaboration. So that's why collaboration is key and relationships are key. And I would say it's not just about the collaboration and relationships you build with product owners or obviously designers, but other researchers in the organization, other disciplines, build those allies. So in a way, kind of forget about the structure and see how you can kind of work across it.
Yeah, I agree that the structure isn't necessarily the most important thing for me either. Like sometimes different people can perform multiple roles, so it's not necessarily the most important thing. I completely agree with the points that have been raised, and Marla especially on the creating a culture of psychological safety is so important for designers. If you're committing to any creative endeavor in life, you're committing to showing up and getting your ass kicked. And so having an organizational structure that can allow you to get your ass kicked and also be able to get back up again and move on to the next thing is really important. And I think in certainly in less mature organizations that I've been a part of, the structure isn't there for people to be, beaten down and supported through that, and so they just become yes men. Creating that framework for people to be able to get the critiques, like Marla was saying, and also get the support to grow when they're creative. Great.
Mary Claire, 100% building networks across divisions is critical. Very true. Katja, you can't do it alone. Very true. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. So I spoke about the top level of design maturity being the visionaries, where design is implemented as part of a business strategy. What does that actually mean? I'll throw that over to Erietta. Why don't you start?
Customer centricity for me is what that means. And we started this conversation talking about research, and so for us, it's the type of research, that it's behavioural research, that the customer centricity is not just a slogan, it's represented in our understanding and advocacy of users or customers or participants, depending on what kind of sector and field you're in, and bringing that into the forefront of requirements, strategy, design.
Lee, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it is, that for me, that's the one big thing that always kind of links all of this stuff together, right? It's easy to come up with some sort of design strategy or whatever, but if we're not really understanding how the value that we're delivering to our customers and what that value is and how do we measure that value, they're the things to me that kind of define how mature an organization is and how well embedded into an organization's culture that design is. I'm being slightly flippant, but like the rest of the stuff is just kind of facilitating to getting to that outcome, really. So yeah, I would agree.
Shane, is there anything you would add to that? Katja, I'm going to come to you because you raised an interesting point when we spoke about this recently, but Shane, is there anything you'd add?
No, I completely agree. I would just add, on Lee's point about measurement, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. So, most parts of the experience we should be able to measure in some meaningful way. And I think over my career so far, like over the last 10 years, measurement of the experience is one of the areas that I haven't seen done particularly well. And it really lets us down because it means at the top level, it's really hard for the, some leaders who might not have the time to commit to going through the process, can't see benefit from the work. So yeah, measurement. And it's not just the NPS score. Like, we think of NPS or CSAT or, SuperQ as the ways of measuring the experience. But if you're delivering a great experience, then you're going to get more people using, your product. You're going to get more people converting through a funnel. You're going to, so there's a lot of indicators of a good experience as well. And trying to speak a little bit of the business talk in that way can be really helpful to get buy-in.
Okay. Kat, thank you, Shane. Katja, I'm going to just move on to you, because when we spoke about this, you spoke about data, and
I have many opinions about this.
The data, qualitative and quantitative kind of approach to gathering insights. So how does that kind of connect then with the importance of design when it comes to business strategy?
Yeah, so I'd be keen to know whether or not panel agrees with me as to whether or not this is actually part of our job. But this is where I'm at on this particular part of the topic. Shane he's very accurate. We're curating experiences, right? We're designing experiences. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is confined to us creating, stuff on a screen that people interact with, or on a phone, or something like that. It's actually quite a lot broader. And I think if you're looking at yourself and going, I want to be a visionary in my design practice and in my level of design maturity, you actually have to start mixing it up with the other things that you can use to curate an experience. So for example, what APIs does this organization have that can attach to things inside of our customer organization to bring them closer to us, to have a more friction-free experience? What APIs do they have that we could use to connect our experience together in a more frictionless fashion? So starting to get into that, using technology enablement to curate that great experience. And data, I think, is absolutely critical. And I would advise any design practitioner at the moment to at least get a basic understanding of data science and how analytics works. Otherwise, you're going to be looking at a certain level of irrelevance in probably 3 to 5 years' time. And I think also, as part of curating and designing that experience, is looking at what data do we have? What does it tell us? How can we use it to predict where our customers need us to be and when they need us to be there, so that we can already be there? We can design an experience that already has us there. Now, I think that's part of our job. I think that's part of design as a job. And I'm not sure if it's a particularly widely held view, but that's what my 10 cents is, when 50 cents dollar on it is.
Marla, jump in.
I love that you said that, Katja, because what I was hoping that we would get to is that, design is a way to spot opportunities and for us to identify things that are happening in the future and create strategies for our business that actually are they're actually going to deliver value both to the business and to the customer, or to the potential new set of users. So whether it's looking at
just while you're talking through this, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A. One asking about how do we get UX to be business strategy? This is how.
Well, I would say that UX is, I'm sort of thinking that more broader than UX, just design as a discipline as a whole. So for example, I've worked with organizations to help facilitate their strategy, working with group CEOs across the business, and we're using design techniques to really get them to think about where their business needs to go in the future and what trends are coming up and what customers are saying. And to me, the UX design, I think, sort of falls into a bit of a siloed and sort of small compartmentalized bucket. But when we talk about design, design techniques can be really, really powerful to spot opportunities. And that's why I really love where Katja went with that, because that's exactly why I just pinged Liam and said, I'd like to say something next. And I didn't even know what was going to come out of your mouth, Kat.
I've got there's something that's kind of I think interesting that I face every now and again. I think it pops up for everyone, every workplace, is this sense of user experience design and whether it can be visionary or not at all, and people thinking that because usability is so much at the core of what user experience is. I'm not saying it's the only thing, that a human-centered design process brings about a genericized process. That is a huge critique of design, particularly from marketing folks. And so for me, I don't disagree with any of the statements here, But I think when we're thinking about ourselves as visionaries, we've got to have a counter for that sort of criticism. When we think about ourselves as visionaries, we've got to think about whether our techniques, our design methods are fit for purpose for the problem, whether we've got the elbow room to exercise those methods to do ourselves to fulfill the promise we've made about being visionary, and whether indeed it is a pure design process or whether you're mixing methods with other disciplines, you know, with kind of futurist methods and other things. Because at that point, it can, the playfulness across disciplines can be really fun. But yeah, I would always have I think everyone should have a kind of response to the faster horses quote.
I'm not surprised that Monique Rappel agrees with you, Erietta. Completely agree, because designers frame problems differently. They can often read data differently to enable shifts that are blocked by others, or others blocked by normative interpretations of data. Very, very true. Amethyst, critical thinking equals UX design. It's visionary. Good point there. Amethyst, if no one else has anything to add, I might just jump into the next question. God, time is really running away.
Yeah, we've got a few questions in the Q&A.
We have. So what I'll do...
There's one that I think is really pertinent to design maturity, which is around stakeholder management, which could be worth visiting.
Absolutely. So yeah. Well, let's read that one then. So is it from Ritesh? Is that one you're referring to? Katja?
Yeah, because I think, yes, because I think a lot of people are going to come across this stakeholder, and all 5 of us, we know this stakeholder.
Absolutely. So how do you manage stakeholders who are an important part of a project but have no idea about design's role, or rather have a limited view? Katja, why don't you kicked us off? Why didn't you jump in?
Oh, I've been doing heaps of talking. I'm going to throw this one to Lee.
Lee, go on.
Okay. Yeah, look, I honestly think a big part of this, and people will probably, I don't know, some people will agree, some people may not, but a big part of this is about what we talked about earlier about the coaching, and about the empathy that you need to build within organizations. Like you know, I've been in organizations myself where I've got really frustrated and I'm just like, oh God, can you just like get what I'm talking about? And that never worked. That approach really doesn't work. And it really, I have to like, it's about building that empathy, building the understanding, taking, you know, cliche, but taking the stakeholder on the journey of like, this is why we do things this way, because the value that we can create at the end of it is much greater than if we just, you know, take orders and take some requirements and then go away and design stuff. So I really do think a big part of it is that empathy building within the organization. And, you know, and having that constant communication and being really clear about, again, about the kind of value that you're trying to create through that process. So I think it is like the whole stakeholder conversation is one that I'm sure we could have for hours. And, you know, there is also this, you know, sometimes there's this challenge where people think you're kind of overstepping, like it's like, well, you know, I'll give an example, like a marketing department as an example, where it's like, well, historically I've owned the customer or I've owned design, and now there's this kind of design department that, you know, is taking some of the stuff that I used to own. And, you know, so there is a kind of sometimes an uncomfortable kind of conversation that needs to happen, or, you know, as I say, taking people on that journey to kind of understand how it's different, why it's different. It's not an easy thing to do, and I guess we've all probably got multiple battle scars from having to kind of go through this in various organizations. But I do honestly believe, I fall back to that, I honestly believe empathy is like, we have to build that empathy and understanding.
I don't hope you don't mind me jumping in, but there's this really great Mike Montero quote, which I like chucking out at times like this, which is, a good designer will put all that shit on a page, and a great designer will help you realize that half that shit isn't necessary. And like, I think it comes back to sort of, first of all, the coaching, and not just of the stakeholders and the people that you work with, but also questioning and sort of asking why, you know. And I think that goes back to the empathy that Lee talks about. why are they pushing for that? Why are they, trying to control the design? And I think a lot of that sometimes just comes down to a lack of trust, or it comes down to a lack of education. There's always like a driving force behind people's behavior. And I think we've all been in that conversation. And one thing that I think is our sort of responsibility as design leaders to help lift design maturity is to empower the designers that work with us and for us to really be able to challenge stakeholders in a really elegant and articulate and educational way, so that it's not us versus them, it's all of us together building something wonderful and great, and trying to understand the needs of the business, the needs of the customers, what's possibly possible from a technical perspective. And it talks about empathy, but I think it's coaching. Like, I always try and impart with people I work with that we should never go to someone and say, what do you think of this design? Can you approve it? That's not the role of anyone outside of design, in my opinion, unless there's a very strong brand. And, there's obviously always exceptions to that rule. But like, how do we empower designers so that they can have those conversations, so that they can challenge those stakeholders, but more importantly, educate them so that we are all in this together and they understand what they're asking for and the ramifications of it. So those are my sort of particular personal sort of views on that.
Yeah, I have something to add. I like to take a research-led approach to dealing with my stakeholders, managing stakeholders. I like to remember that stakeholders, especially the awful ones, are people too, and that often people aren't waking up thinking they want to make your life hell, although that often transpires. I think a lot of the time, the stakeholders that we work with won't give us the time of day if they don't feel like their needs are understood. And so a lot of the time it's just about, it's listening more than you speak. In a tip for a healthy relationship, whether it's at home or at work, is talk half the time, if as a sort of principle. And so, like, just asking questions and getting your stakeholders to talk more about what their problems are. When I joined any organization, certainly when I was consulting, I would just spend a bunch of time with the product managers asking them, tell me about your role, tell me about, a project that was a failure, what happened? Tell me about a project that was a success, what happened? Helps you to understand those triggers that will help you to be really successful in persuading them. We had a project a while ago where there was this project that everyone internally thought was a complete failure. And that was like freaking gold for me, because I could translate that into like how the design process helps them to prevent that from happening. And then it was like a mental shortcut for the stakeholders, because you could just say, well, do you want this project to happen again? And it helped to persuade people to perhaps take the design process more seriously. Obviously, it doesn't work in all cases, but I think if you spend a bit more time understanding the needs of your stakeholders, then you're going to get a lot further.
We did a similar thing in the big bank. We took a project that was a desperate failure and we put a dollar value on that desperate failure and went, this is what it cost you to do this, to screw this up this badly. And then, again, it's shorthand. Well, do you want that again? That's where this is going. Let's do this properly.
Yeah.
I think, there's so many things. There's so many things in that. One thing that I'll kind of pick up on is that we've got to be really careful about how we preference or center design in our conversations with stakeholders. Because if we sound like we are educating, not partnering, they might not listen to us. So you've got to be really mindful of your tone. You've got to be really mindful of your stance. You've got to be really mindful. Don't over explain for a million reasons. Everyone I think who's listening, to this chat, and everyone here knows, show don't tell. But also when you over explain, you kind of lose your power. So it's not about being more powerful. It's about having dialogue and what you can do as a designer to foster that dialogue. And Marla talked talked about elegant ways to have these conversations. We've got a really awesome toolkit to have these conversations. We can evidence our design rationale in scenarios, in journeys, with user research, in all sorts of ways. Use those tools, don't forget about them.
I think what I'm hearing a lot of is that empathy is so important, and being able to ask the right questions and being able to assess who you're talking to very, very quickly and allow them to be heard, understand their role, the role that they play is part of it. It was kind of, you've actually answered a question that I was going to ask, but what I'm going to kind of move into is some organizations, they don't have design leaders or to help influence change within an organization, but they do have very talented designers that are solving problems. So how do you then, as a designer, manage from the bottom up in order to be able to kind of create impact and be able to ensure that you're being heard and that the work that you're doing is being responded to well? How do you have that influence from the bottom up? Anybody can jump in.
I'll go on this one. I've done this by involving people in the process, like Marla said earlier, in that collaborative way with a coaching mindset, actually going, okay, I've got all of this material from some interviews that I've done. I've cut all my quotes up and I'm going to do affinity diagramming with these quotes to see if I can find some trends. Do you want to help me? Let's do this together. I'll show you how you do it. And I've had developers in there helping me affinity diagram quotes out of stuff and going, hey, look, that they said this and they also said it again here, and this other person said it again here and here and here. And then what happens is, because you've involved them in the process, they actually can then advocate for the work when you're not in the room. And so you're actually empowering a whole lot of people to use design tools to get to outcomes. So that would be my hot tip for managing from the bottom. It's that collaboration and involvement in the process. It's not a magic box of tricks for you to keep to yourself. It's something that you need to share and bring everybody in to be able to use.
Before anyone else in, I'm just going to read a couple of comments just kind of on that point, and then I'll jump over to you, Marla. But Matt says you've got to build those relationships early on, build genuine empathy of their role and their concerns. I think this is probably referring to the last question. Sometimes stakeholders just need an ear to feel valued in the project. Amitis, rapport and empathy are two key factors. Absolutely true. Okay, Marla, I'll throw that over to you because it looked like you were...
Oh yeah, I've always got something to say, you know me. I was just going to, first of all, agree with Katja, but just build on it a little bit. So, when you bring people into the process, they feel more emotionally connected to what it is that you produce. And, you're sort of subtly educating, you're collaborating, but you're also giving people a stake in what you create. And what that tends to do is people don't feel that they need to come in and sort of create those last minute impacts to feel that they've contributed to what you're doing. So I think that's a really great strategy that Katja talked about to bring people into the process. Like, I've been a sole designer in an organization. I think I was probably one of the first UX designers at that big bank that Katja was talking about. That was about like 13, 14 years ago. And it was really, really, really quite challenging. But and I was still finding my feet at the time then as well as a UX designer. But what was really amazing about it was, once you could sort of demonstrate user-centered design techniques, like we did the first usability test on a rebrand of the banking platform, and people could actually hear and see the impact of involving customers in the process, in what design could do for the business. That platform then went on to win loads of awards, and that wasn't just me, that was like a host of people involved in that who all played an amazing part. But we showed as well as told, but not in a way where it was in a black box, not in a way where we mystified it. I've seen people, try and educate and say things like designerly mindset. Please don't do that. It's going to polarize people. Yes, I've seen that. It can polarize people. So, Erietta touched on it perfectly before as well. Don't use jargon. Don't create language that is esoteric, that makes you come off as special snowflake. You're not a special snowflake, you're a designer, you're doing a job like everybody else. So be inclusive is probably the best way. And, start to build those relationships from the bottom up, and then hopefully soon, everyone will be singing your song.
Thank you, Marla. Anything that anyone would add on that point, or shall I jump into the next question? Lee, is there anything that you want to add?
Just very quickly, I absolutely agree with Marla and Katja. The one slight kind of build on that would be like getting people in the business, if you can, talking to customers directly as well, and seeing that, so that they really start to buy into, you know, what the process, the value that we're creating. You know, the amount of times I've seen, you know, people within the business get that kind of fire inside of an enthusiasm that they get from directly hearing feedback from customers is such a powerful thing. So I think if you can, it's not always possible, I understand that, but if you can, that also is one technique that you can use to kind of get that you know, working from the ground up.
Yeah, one thing I'd add, I agree with everything there, so kind of emphatically, but one thing I would add as well, I think that, you know, like we're designers, so we might have some perfectionist tendencies going on, I don't know, probably, is you might not get to do everything you want to do on a project, or, you know, on a product that you're working on at that point in time with that team. So just kind of maybe take a step back, have a look at where design is happening with your collaborators, take a strengths-based approach and go, okay, how can I grow something from that little kernel, you know, and then build up slowly over time. I know, and look, I'm just such a big advocate of obviously customer research, user research, and usability testing, and I've worked on really amazing, fun projects, and I know that's not the reality. It's not so simple for everyone. So, you know, yes, there are those ideals and those projects happen, but just think about, well, what can I do? If that's not easy for you in your context, then you might want to start with, you know, just having really good design critiques with your team, and then build on that, and all your way up to that customer involvement.
Thank you, Erietta. I do have a couple more questions, but to be honest, there's so many questions that are coming in from Q&A. I think I'm actually just going to launch into those. And loads of comments being made. Some people are asking whether this is actually being recorded. It is being recorded. So if you have jumped in late, you will get a recording of the video. So don't worry about that. Okay, so I'll be referencing different topics and questions that we've already hit upon with some of these questions. But Anonymous asked, when we are asking about an organization's user design research, what does good look like? What is an example of good user research practice? Why don't I throw that to you, Shane?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer. But what I would say is there's, firstly, like moderated testing is a really good place to start. So just generally, if the organization is starting to have conversations with users, that's a good starting point. I found unmoderated testing or surveys to be really quite difficult to understand the why, and really difficult to get stakeholders to, you know, shift their perspectives. But yeah, I guess it's a bit of a journey to get an organization to a really great sort of behavioral and ethnographic research, and building, you know, credibility in things like usability testing and concept testing can be really valuable to get the organization up a notch in their research capability.
Anything else that anyone would add on what would a good example, sorry, what would an example of good user research practice entail?
A million things, Liam. 1 million things, but it depends on where you're up to in the project, what you're looking for, what that good means, what that impact means. But if we're talking about that kind of strategic side, I mean, Shane was talking about kind of ethnographic practice, then it's telling people something they didn't already know. Like, really think about distinguishing an observation, a data point, from a finding, from an insight, and think about what it is that is new that you are imparting to people, particularly if you get the opportunity to do some of the funner stuff.
Thank you, Ari. I need to keep remembering to unmute. Marla, I think you're referring to the question around a person with no design background leading a design team. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's the one that
was you, Katja.
because that's the one that's disappeared, and I read that one and went,
Yeah, so I'll ask that one then. So what do you think about a person with no design background leading a design team? Is that possible, or is it just a people management role? I don't know who wants to tackle that one.
It's a people management role.
Well, it is. It is.
It is a people management role. Like if you don't know how to conduct the practice, then you're going to be at a disadvantage managing a team of designers.
But I think it depends on the hierarchy that you've got there. Like you need to have someone who understands craft as well, so that you've got the right guidance and learning and development support. But I don't think that you exclusively should say, you know, I mean, some designers are terrible leaders, let's be perfectly honest. The same way, you know, some business people are not particularly good at their jobs. Like not everybody's great at everything. And I think that we've got to allow that for that flexibility. And a lot of designers don't want to come off the tools. They want to be individual contributors. They don't want to go into that management role. So I think as long as you've got the support structure set up in place in the organization and that person isn't trying to play the role of a designer.
Yeah, I dig what you're saying, Marla, and I'm just laughing because I had one role. I mean, I was a design manager in the role, but my manager was an accountant, and then our director was an economist, and he'd worked a lot in the pricing function of the organisation, who were actually the best workshop participants. Whenever we ran workshops, they were really good lateral thinkers. So it can be done. It depends at what level. I think, you know, a lot of people would look at us when we were chatting and they'd be like, this doesn't make sense. And we'd reply, works for us. And we found, we had really interesting conversations, because those conversations were these mashup of disciplines, and definitely the kind of artifacts that me and my team produced in that time changed as a result of the influence of that business mindset into what we were doing. And I still use some of those formats that I created when I was reporting to an accountant and an economist. And I really treasure that time, actually.
So we've got a question here from Praveen. She said, asking, how do you handle C-suite level stakeholders who are highly opinionated, but don't have time to join in our collaborative process or take effort in understanding? So frustrating. I'll throw that one. Lee, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Sure. Yeah. Look, I guess it's something that we all deal with at some point. I think it's really, I don't know, it's really interesting. I have to do this regularly. I'm sure all of the other panelists do as well. We have to talk to the CEO or the COO about some of the work that we're doing. I guess I always make sure that I'm telling a good story and kind of showing, okay, this is what we're doing. I don't go into, I've had to sort of adapt my style, I guess, when I'm talking to, presenting or whatever to the C-level. They probably don't care about the methods and how I got to where I got to. They kind of go, here's what we think the problem was. How did you understand whether that actually was a problem? What do you think we should do about it? So I kind of tailor my presentations and my responses based on the fact that, what do I think they actually care about? What do I think they really want to know? But I still think it's important to do that. Like, I still think if I'm working for a company, that company is paying my wages. Like, I think it's important that they're asking me a question potentially. So I still have to take them on that journey. I still have to kind of, walk them through what we're doing, why we're doing it that way. But I'm lucky, to be honest. I'm lucky that I've got some really good stakeholders and a C-level specifically. Like, I was doing some stuff the other day, talking them through what we'd done, and they basically said, just go away and do some more research. And I'm like, awesome, that's exactly what I love hearing that kind of thing. But like, I get that it's not always that straightforward, and I get that there is, you know, if you have this kind of, what do you call it, like seagulls or whatever, who aren't involved in the process and then have a very strong opinion on what you've done, that is challenging. Katja, looks like you've got a...
Yeah, I've got a couple of points on this. If you're talking C-suite and you are trying to get them on board and influence them to allow you to do research, design practice, things like that, talk about risk. Talk about the fact that the activity that you're going to do is going to de-risk this project. It's going to remove risk from the thing that they're trying to do, because you will find out whether the thing is going to work or be good before they spend a bunch of money on it. So risk is a really good way to frame some of the things that we do. And on the point of, a C-level person who's very opinionated, the method that I use with people like that is, so I say, oh, that's great. Okay, so this is the hypothesis that you believe to be true. Let's capture that. We're going to put this into a lean canvas with a hypothesis, your hypothesis into a lean canvas, and then I'm going to design an experiment to prove or disprove whether it's true. And so you can take this experiment method, like that doesn't require a billion years of research or anything like that. You can just say, all right, I'm going to take this thing that you're telling me is true and real, and I'm going to design an experiment. We're going to agree on some metrics that say whether it works or it doesn't. And that's a really good way of facilitating opinionated stakeholders and still using design practice that's going to move whatever it is that outcome you're trying to get to. It'll move it forward, because you will learn. No matter what you do, you'll learn. You might learn that it's an absolute disaster and they don't know what they're talking about. So those would be my two. And Marla's going like, I think
it could work. I just want to double down on the risk one, because I've started using that quite a lot. And the conversation I generally have, and obviously it depends on the conversation that you're having with your CEO and exactly what exactly the challenge is. But I always say, do you want to spend, $500,000 building this and find out that it's wrong? Or do you want to spend $10,000 testing this and confirming if it's right? Or at least trying to get that building up, that understanding up front. So, it always used to be, we've got a good hunch, we'll just build it and we'll put it to market and we'll see if it works. And we can't afford to do that in this day and age. So yeah, just couldn't agree with Katja's risk comment more. I think it needs to be really articulated. And it also talks about how we are now talking the language of business, because, we are not there to make things pretty. We are there to deliver value for the organization, its employees, and also not just, I always had this conversation the other day and someone said, the business users, they don't need to have research, they don't need testing, we're just going to build it. And I said, you do know that employees are people too, and we've got to start having that conversation, because that's where you actually invest in your employee experience and you de-risk productivity investments, you de-risk software investments. So plus definitely 100%.
The one thing I would add to this is just I completely agree. Risk is such an easy shortcut to get stakeholders on board. But I guess coming back to the point earlier, it's just really important to understand the stakeholders at the C-suite as well, because the C-suite are people too. And so before I go into any board meeting or whatever, I always map out who's in the room, what are their goals, what are their triggers, especially triggers, because there are often trigger words, and historical relationships that prevent you from being able to move forward. And there's all these opaque power dynamics that prevent you from being able to make progress. So trying to understand that before going in can be really important. And I would say the power broker in the room is probably not the boss. So being aware of who the power brokers are in the conversation at that C-level can be really important. And then, of course, to Lee's point before, really being intentional about the story you're presenting.
We still have a number of questions. Technically, we're supposed to be finishing up now, but I think I'm just going to continue to ask some questions.
Can we answer Beck Purser's question, please? I really want to get into that.
Okay, so how do you balance coaching clients with the potential to diminish how do you balance coaching clients with the potential to diminish our work and skills? Are we at risk to cheapening our craft?
Yeah, so this is where we get into the perils of design thinking theatre, this is not my term. This is Spider Girl, that's her Twitter handle. I can't remember her actual name. This is her term, which is basically where we stand up in a boardroom and we put post-it notes on the wall and we move it around, and we get our stakeholders to move the post-it notes around as well. And then, you know, look at us all doing design. Well, hey. And I think it's really important to look at what you're doing in terms of engaging with clients and stakeholders and go, am I participating in design thinking theatre here? Is this actually going to get us something, you know, insightful or generative so that we can actually, you know, get a result on this project? And I think that's a hard question that we need to ask ourselves, because sometimes getting them all to put post-it notes on the wall is an easy way to just stop them harassing us, or whatever it is that we just want them to go away so that we can do the craft. So yeah, I think it's a really great question. And sometimes I think in order to have that coaching or to get the client on board or the stakeholder on board, sometimes we do a bit of a shitty job of design in that theatrical fashion. So I'll throw that to others to see what they've got to say on it.
Like to jump in
I could speak 1 hour monologue on this topic, but I won't, and Beck might have already heard it. I don't think coaching is necessarily training, and so I think it's worthwhile to make that distinction when you're working with people. It's why I made the point earlier, make sure you're not speaking at people. So what form is that coaching taking? Do you need to coach at all? Look, I've got a little bit of a cynical view of some of that design training, but it all depends on your context. I think you could have another whole topic just on that, Liam. It could make sense. It could make sense if we're talking about training, to upskill some product teams into doing some forms of testing with guardrails so they know what good looks like. So they're not just doing, you know, training with 5 users and that's it for a whole product, and, you know, that sort of baloney. So there's lots of different ways to kind of carve up this question, but I'd say, you know, try and think about, are you coaching, are you training, are you collaborating?
Maybe we can save that for Design Maturity Webinar 2.0 next time. We'll have you involved.
Rant 2.0.
Yeah, let's do that.
Love it. Anything that anyone else wants to add on that point? We do have a couple more questions. I'll finish up with a question, but anything else that anyone wants to add? Okay. So have you noticed any differences in working with corporates that have a large design ops function, since that's growing, versus working with just a marketing branding department of a large corporate? And how does this impact your approach and team structure?
You all right, Lee? You look
sorry, everyone.
No, design ops is the greasing the wheels and the guardrails to create efficiencies in what we do. It's not just that, but a lot of it is that. And so when you see large design ops functions in an organization, you would expect to see a more efficient design practice or something. I don't know. I haven't worked deeply with design operations teams, so I might leave this to someone else.
I just want to, maybe I won't go into this in too much detail, but I do agree with you, Katja. Like, I think there's this big, you know what, and this is one of the, I guess, my frustrations with the design community, which I love and I've worked in for a very long time, but we tend to like sometimes cherry pick these things, or like the next big thing is this and it's design ops, and it's like, oh, but like maybe it's just because I'm old and a bit grumpy, but I'm like, well, surely that's just literally like just making the process better so that it's easier.
You're just doing it properly.
Just doing it properly, like, yeah. So I sometimes
it's probably solving a problem in that particular context.
Yeah.
You know, like if you need operational efficiency, then you'll need design ops. If you're not operating at a particular scale, if the work is more contained, then, you know, you might want some processes in place to make sure things run smoothly, but you might not need an operation in that way. So that question's really hard for me. I think it sounds so specific to a situation. I think I'd have to unpack the situation.
I was going to say, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
So I need to unmute myself again. Okay. Any tips of how to make UX part of the business strategy? I think we kind of answered that one, but is there anything that, we kind of answered that. So anything else anyone would add? Moving on. Okay. An off-topic question. No, Erietta, did you have something you wanted to add on that? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sure. I cut you off. Okay. We've got an off-topic question.
Sorry,
Marla.
I did want to answer that question. I'm sorry, and I'm sort of sitting here.
Go ahead.
Like what I would say is, to me, it's all about, I mean, like Erietta made a really good point at the very beginning of this webinar, which was, and we talked about how mature the organization was. And she said, it depends at which part research is injected in the product development process. And if you are, undertaking research, you want to understand what your users' needs are, but they might be today, they might be tomorrow, but they might be 2 years in the future. And there's some really amazing work happening in design futures. Our MIT is doing a whole master's in it at the moment. That is design strategy as far as I'm concerned, and that's using human-centered design techniques to predict where the business might be going and to help guide them in places that could be a really good play for them. And that's what the last company I worked for, BCGDV, they did that super well. So I probably wouldn't say UX, I would probably just say research to really understand and spot trends, and that can really help with a business strategy.
I agree with that. And the other thing I'd add to that is just learn about strategy. We get so obsessed about design strategy. I know the question wasn't about that specifically. It was anchoring it in business strategy. Learn about business strategy, and don't think about design as something that is separate to. Think about strategy in terms of layers and what part you're playing, and then look, ideally try and get in on projects where strategy is being revisited, and just be really open to what those other disciplines are teaching you, not necessarily to co-opt what those disciplines are doing, but to work out your place amongst them.
Thank you, Erietta. There's one more question before I launch into a kind of wrap up, I guess, unless anyone else has anything that they want to add last minute. Mary Claire, I think this is more for the design leaders that are listening in to the room, or design managers. She wants to know what tricks and tips are you using to keep your teams inspired, connected, and learning through COVID?
Oh, I can have a crack at that one and let you know what we're doing at Designit. We have our weekly ceremony, which is, we call it Zoo Time. And what we do with that is we distribute the responsibility for running it. That's the first thing. It's not always one person, and it's not always the design leader's responsibility. And it's okay for you to be vulnerable and say, I need help with this. I just can't. I'm low vibe. I just can't. So we distribute the responsibility, and somebody prepares. We spend half the session, which is an hour session, asking a little bit of how you're doing, and then asking a question that's related to whatever the person who's organized it is going to present afterwards as a thing. And then we spend the other half of the session with the person who's organized it, sharing something they think is interesting. So, for example, one of my crew used to work for the funeral industry. So she shared about how the funeral industry worked, and it was enormous rot and all that sort of stuff. So nothing really to do with work or anything like that. So just creating a space to share stuff that we think is interesting. And then once a month, we're doing we were doing a half day in the studio, but we've taken it to virtual. And that is very intentional leadership. So we call it Studio Day, and it's about thought leadership. What do we want to share? Do you want to show me what you've figured out how to do with Figma and show everybody else that? So what sorts of things? And again, we distribute the responsibility. 2 people are responsible for organizing that once a month half day Studio Day. We send Uber Eats vouchers for them to have, for people to get breakfast in, because ordinarily we put breakfast on. Those are a couple of things that we're doing to stay connected.
I've seen so many things posted on LinkedIn about gifts that people are sending out to people, just to kind of remind them that they are part of a team, part of a culture. they're not forgotten about. And it's just so nice to see on LinkedIn so many different businesses taking that perspective and, you know, doing what they can. Is there anything else that anyone would add on that point that Mary Claire made and that Katja answered?
Can I just, so I absolutely agree. Sorry, my dogs are going crazy. If you can hear that, apologies. Just, it's always when I turn the mute button off. So I agree, like similar thing, we're running ceremonies and you know, things that aren't just about the work or the craft that we're doing. I think one of the things, so I'm a big mental health advocate. One of the things that I do is I often share how I'm feeling and go, hey, I'm actually not feeling that great today. Like I'm just feeling a bit flat, not feeling, and really the purpose of that is to go, this is a space that is safe and we can basically share how we're feeling and you know, and hopefully that people understand that it's psychologically safe. So that's it's just a little, I guess, little build on what Katja said.
Anything else that anyone wants to add on that?
I think just the biggest part is just, and I think everyone's already talked about this, that it doesn't matter what you do, just make time. Make time, make it regular, create those connections, and more importantly, just reach out to people individually as well. So it's all well and good doing it in that group format, but I think it's really important to ensure that you're still having that one-on-one time with people and checking in on them and making sure there's having those conversations separately as well. So make time is basically the framing I would put.
I ran a webinar at the peak of COVID on empathy and human connection, or the importance of empathy and human connection, and just taking the time to ask the question, like, how are you doing? Are you okay right now? I think it's just so important and so valuable. And before just launching into business as usual, you know, it's just.
I think it's also okay to do it in a way that it's not as direct as well. And somebody, Manisha from the Center for Inclusive Design, she gave me this one. She said, what animal are you today? What color are you today? What meme are you today? What GIF are you today? So there's other ways of sort of eliciting that, you know, pulse check on with people without, you know, how are you? How's your mental health? You know?
Well, maybe not that direct. Yeah. Guys, okay, we're pretty, I mean, we ran out of time a long while ago, so I'm just going to finish up with one question. Okay, so people that are listening in, all different kind of varying levels in terms of design. We've got people that are starting their design journey, we've got design leaders that have been working in design for a long time. But in terms of one tangible takeaway that someone can take that they can maybe even implement tomorrow, is there one kind of nugget of advice that you would give someone listening in, something that they can take away and that they can implement? I'll start with you, Shane.
I don't know if I have the best thoughts on this, but you know, in this context of design maturity and perhaps, you know, looking for a new role or talking to organizations, I would just reiterate that it's not necessarily bad working for a lower maturity organization, and just taking the time to understand what you want as your next career move, because and being really intentional about, I guess, your next move, because if you you know, design maturity really impacts how you will experience your work. And so if you want to be surrounded by a lot of really awesome experts and you join a lower maturity organization, you're going to have a really hard time. You might be in that context right now. Or vice versa. If you want to, you know, have more freedom to make change and build a new team, then you might find a higher maturity organization really challenging. So I would just encourage you to, you know, take stock and be really intentional about the type of work that you want to do at this point in your career.
Marla, same question to you.
Yeah, I was going to sort of take a slightly sort of different tack on that, which was tell people why you're doing what you're doing as a designer. Like, one thing I think that's really super critical is for people to understand why we take the actions we're taking and what the impacts of those actions might be. And, you know, it sort of just speaks to the sort of subtle education that we talked about. You know, you don't want to go in with a sledgehammer, because that's only going to knock the tree down. What you really want to do is just like slowly impart information in a way where people are understanding why you're doing what you're doing, understanding the impact of what they're asking and what that means for design, and slowly start to build that maturity up. Because I mean, I've worked in organizations that have design leadership at the biggest level, but there's always going to be pockets of people that don't understand. So this is not something where there's like a magic bullet or a magic wand and you wave it and it's all okay. You know, we still all have work to do, and that work, I think, is just, you know, and I hate using the J word because it is such a cliche, and Lee said it before, but take them on the journey.
Lee.
Yes, very, very simply for me, two things. Build empathy. And so that's build empathy with the organization, people in the organization and your customers, and use data. Like if I was going to ask, say, like two things that you can practically do, like for me, those two things always work reasonably well. There's a whole plethora of other things you can do, but if you build that empathy and you're using data, then you're well on your way, I reckon.
Okay, Lee, and same question over to you, Erietta.
To add to what people were saying here, trying to think of something new to say. What I'd say is hold something up your sleeve, right? Don't give your stakeholders wireframes or high fidelity prototypes as your first deliverable. There's no going back from that. So that is typically the sign of a low, if we're talking about design maturity, what they're expecting, what they're asking for. Don't give it to them. Give them a journey instead. Give them a scenario instead. If you can't do customer research, think about how what other means of data points or research you can get to rationalize that experience. But try and experiment with holding back some of that honey.
Thank you for that, Erietta. And Katja, we'll end that question with you.
I would advise people to treat your organization like an interesting mystery to be solved, especially if you have, you know, low design maturity, medium design maturity, whatever. Treat it like a mystery to be solved, and look at it. You know how we talk about the adoption curve of the thing? What are the things in the organization I work in that are going to be curve benders? What are the interactions that I can have? What are the actions that I can take? What are the conversations that I need to have that are going to bend that adoption curve around design the way that we want it to? And I think it's almost like a little research project on your own organization to find those curve benders, and then, you know, bend the adoption curve the way that you want it to go.
Fantastic, guys. We're getting lots of love and comments. People have just literally just signing out. Thank you so much. Very informative conversation for important subjects. Great session. I learned lots today. Great insights. Thanks for all the panelists. Brilliant conversations. Thanks, everyone. Love this so much. Guys, I think we'll end it there. Thank you for joining in the conversation today and sharing your insights and being opinionated. We love it. I'll let everyone
welcome.
No worries. And for everyone listening in, yep, there will be a video, so I'll send it out to everybody by tomorrow. Thank you all for listening today. I hope you all have lovely evenings. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night, Liam.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liam.
No worries.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.